Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation this morning on supporting mental health through play. This is part 2 of our 2-part series. I'd like to welcome our 2 presenters this morning, Amber Gant and Sahar Wahidi. Both Amber and Sahar work at the Training and Technical Assistance Center at George Mason University, and we're really very excited to have them with us again today. So welcome, Amber and Sahar, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mary Beth. We are so excited to be here with all of you again today. I'm sorry I missed all of you last week. My name is Amber Gant, as Mary Beth said, and I am the Assistant Director for Early Childhood Special Education here at George Mason's TTAC. Previously, before coming to TTAC, I actually worked for Fairfax County's Office for Children, talking about some of these same topics that we're going to talk about today. So this is my research interest, is the sensory system, unstructured play, as you talked about last week, and also how we support children by responding to their needs. So we are very excited to kick this off today. I'm going to let Sahar introduce herself and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be back here with you all today. My name is Sahar Wahidi, and I'm a third-year PhD student at George Mason studying educational psychology, but within the field of early childhood special education. So really primarily focusing on supporting our educators' self-regulation, which we will talk a little bit about today, and thinking about those interdisciplinary approaches in research methods prior to practice. But prior to my PhD and working with TTAC, I was a site director for therapeutic recreational services in Fairfax County. I've also worked in a day home setting, as well as a K-12 sub in FCPS and a K-12 disabilities tutor. So really excited to have the opportunity to learn with you all today.
And I see some familiar faces and someone in the chat. So it's exciting to see some of you that we all know from our work with Fairfax County, as we support Fairfax County in one of our intensive TA grants. So welcome everyone again. As we're getting started, I do want to just remind you that we all have different needs for learning, and I want to make sure you have what you need. So if you need a fidget while you're learning, if you need some scribble paper, if you need to take some movement breaks and move around while we're talking, we encourage all of those things because we want to be able to give you whatever you need to be able to learn today. Next slide, please. Okay, so our targeted outcomes for today is we're going to really look at and explore ways to respond versus react to sensory needs. We're going to look at that and ground ourselves in that idea, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We're going to learn the importance of incorporating movement and touch into early learning experiences as a foundation for learning and development. Talk about, like Sahar mentioned, we're going to discover how to co-regulate and provide a goodness of fit for your child or your student. And all of these things we're going to be doing through play, right? Because our interactions with children most of the day should be through play. Next slide, please. Okay, as we get started, I'm going to ask a lot of times for you to put things in the chat. I want to make this as interactive as possible and learn from each other. I'm also going to be very open to listening to your questions and responding in the moment if needed, and really taking our learning to that place. That is how I like to teach. So I really encourage you to be active in the chat so that we can do that together. To kick things off, this quote, I would love to just get some ideas in the chat of how we should fill this in. Children are telling us what they need. It's our job to. How should we fill in the blank of that quote? What do you think? Listen, hear them, watch and listen, meet their need. Yes, pay attention. Really good ideas here. I think we're going to talk a lot about meeting their needs today. Observe, yes. And children aren't always telling us with their words, right? We really need to observe their actions and what they're telling us through their body and their movements. Acknowledge. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about that today too, the importance of validating children. We were thinking about the same thing, whoever just typed in the chat. Yes, validate is a great word for how we think about this. Engage, absolutely. Provide a nurturing environment physically and social emotionally. We're going to talk about that too. All right, really, really great ideas. Thank you so much for sharing with us in the chat. I want us to really keep this in mind as we talk today, because I think sometimes we can overcomplicate what we're trying to observe, and it can feel, especially when we talk about like the sensory system, there's so many ways, so many therapeutic terms out there, and we really want to just see what children are showing us. And when we really just tune in to what they're showing us what they need, right? Sometimes it might not be appropriate for the classroom, but we can help them by finding other things to match that need. And that's what we're going to talk about today as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want us to really ground ourselves in this concept. I think react and respond, oftentimes this can have similar meanings, right? When we look this up in a dictionary. But I want us to really think about this in two different ways, okay? So when we think about a reaction, when we think about how we react to children, it's instant, it's without thinking, it's that survival oriented, it's a stress response, right? And sometimes we have to do that, right? If children are in danger, we have to have immediate reactions, right? But as much as we can, if we can approach children from a responsive strategy, if we have responsive strategies, we can respond to them by taking that time to really consider what's happening for them, how to guide them, how to support them, and we can really think out how to help them, and this would have long-lasting effects on their learning and development. That's where we want to be most of the time. Okay, so when we think about that responsiveness, we are doing some of the things you just talked about when we talked about that quote, right? We're validating, we're providing support, we're guiding them to meet their needs. And again, there's instances where we have to react first, but after that reaction, if we can really take that time, take a moment, take a step back once everyone is safe, if there's a safety issue, and then respond. You know, that is how we are going to help children to be able to cope in stressful situations in their play, in their daily interactions. I think that one thing we've seen as we've worked with educators over the last couple of years and some parents indirectly with educators is that we've gone through something, right? We've all gone through something in the last couple of years that has brought new levels of stress to adults, which also has brought that stress to children. And we are seeing in classrooms across the country, I think probably the number one request for professional development is challenging behaviors, because our children are struggling and our educators are struggling, our parents are struggling. We're all struggling to figure out, you know, how to move past, how to come back to what we once knew as normal. And when we think about how that affects children, I think that children have been reacted to a lot over the last couple of years. And how do we shift our mindsets? How do we get back to that place where we are in that responsive place with children more than we're in that reaction place? So that's what I really want us to ground ourselves in when we're thinking about how do we respond during play in those daily interactions. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about that, you know, oftentimes children are telling us what they need, right? They're telling us through their body, they're telling us through how they're interacting, right? And oftentimes when children are telling us what they need, it's what we're going to call and refer to as a sensory signal, okay? Now, again, there's a lot of therapeutic terms out there we could go down. We could really have, I had an 8-hour course on this. Okay. We're not going to do that today. But we're going to use this to really help us to recognize stress in children. It's so important for us to really know and respond in those ways that support children by what they're telling us through their sensory signals. And we're also going to really zero in on movement and touch today, because what we know is that that really helps us build that foundation for things like behavior and learning and social skills and all those things we need in that early brain development. So I'm going to ask you for a second, what do you think it means if a child is seeking input? What does that mean when we say they're seeking input? They're showing us that they're seeking input. Yes, and I did see Alice put in the chat that all behaviors are a form of communication. Absolutely. Looking for acceptance, looking for you to assist and guide. Catherine says actively trying to see. I missed that one part. Literally bumping into people, crying, screaming. Yeah, that can definitely happen. And that's one of the things we talk about with movement seeking sometimes, asking for help. Come into your space. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about some examples specifically with movement and touch in a moment, but the main thing that we're seeing that they are expressing that need, that they need more of something, right? Like if a child is coming into your space, maybe in a way of like jumping in the middle of the circle or kind of crashing onto the furniture, as we might say in a home environment, they're showing us like, I need some really great movement here, right? I am showing you I need that. It might not always be what is acceptable in the environment. And there are ways that we can help them through that and give them strategies to use to get that same input that they are showing us that they need in a different way. And we're going to talk about how to respond to those signals in a moment. On the flip side of things, what does it look like when a child is avoiding sensory input? What does the avoiding look like? Any ideas? Put them in the chat. Hiding, moving away, covering ears. Yes, great ways to describe it, Catherine. Losing control, maintaining their own separate space, right? They might go away from an activity or something that is causing them distress. Pushing away, screaming, closing eyes and ears. Absolutely. Not hearing you, right? When children are really struggling maybe with some auditory concerns, they may not be able to actually decipher the sounds and be able to hear you. Saying no to the task. Yeah. Saying it's boring. Right. Ignoring me. Yeah, Lisa. And not intentionally, right? They're showing us that something is bothering them. It's causing them distress. 100%. Okay. All right, so we're going to take a look at some examples. Sahara, if you can go to the next screen. So some of you already shared some kind of general examples, but I want us to really think about the two areas that we're talking about today with the sensory system is touch and movement. Tactile, another word for touch, right? And movement. So what does Alice says she really loves it when they have learned to use their words. Yeah, and sometimes it's hard for young children, right, in their brain development to share their words when it comes to emotions and how they're feeling stress-wise, and these are going to be our signals that we talk about today. So what do you think are some ways that children might show that they are seeking touch? How do children show that they are seeking touch? What are some examples? A lot of hugging. Yep, a lot of hugging, wanting that input, reach out for hugs. Hands on everything. Yes, yes, Catherine. I actually wrote down that as one of our examples to share, touching everything as they pass, right? Touching things on the wall, grabbing or pulling on you. I think I understand what you mean by the violence. I would probably term it just a little different in that you might see them like next to a friend and kind of maybe hitting or doing some things like that. But again, when we think about children and their brain development, that's telling us that that might be a need for a different kind of tactile input, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, how about movement seeking? When children are really wanting that input through movement, what are some things that we see happening? Jumping up and down, out of their seat, running, fidgeting, pulling a friend's hair. Oh no. I know some of these things we have to remember, we talked about, it has to be a reaction first before we can respond. Leaving the room, like running out of the room, being fidgety, move towards you at circle, asking for breaks, lying upside down on the couch. Yeah, that gives a lot of input, doesn't it? Laying upside down on the couch. That definitely gives some input. I know something that I actually used to do things in homes as well when I was younger. And we would, a lot of children got exercise balls and would lay, instead of laying upside down on the couch, lay on the exercise ball. And the good thing about that is it's also giving them some really good core input and core work, which is something that we have seen really change over the last 30 years. And if you were here last week and talked about the unstructured play and how that's changed, that core strength is something that we really, really need to target in children and build that strength. Okay, how about tactile avoiding? So avoiding touch, what does that look like? Avoiding touch, complaining about socks or tags on clothing. Yes, like the sock line not lining up is definitely part of that too, right? Removing clothing and shoes, not wanting to get hands messy. Yeah, not wanting to have their clothes on, certain textures. Absolutely. Absolutely. Putting hands up. Yeah, so things like, Play-Doh. Some children might feel really good to touch some Play-Doh, but some other children may not like to touch the Play-Doh, and in another sense may not like the smell of Play-Doh. So they might not want to touch it. Finger paints. I know some of you here who are in the classroom probably have a lot of alternatives to finger paint, because there are children who will definitely avoid getting paint on their hands, right? And we have some other strategies to be able to paint in other ways. Okay, I think we still need to do movement avoiding. What does that look like? Avoiding movement. Avoiding work. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like? Sitting during dance time. Yep, that's a good example for sure. Laying flat on the ground. What are some other ways that you might see avoiding movement? A lot of times with avoiding too, it's appearing fearful of something like stairs, you know, going on playground equipment. It might seem to cause a lot of anxiety and fear. Turning their back, moving away. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so can you move on to the next slide, Sahar? So when we think about some of these examples, and we think about how do we respond during play, during these interactions to these signals, right? We talked about first, we want to keep all children safe because there might be some things that children are doing when they're sensory seeking or sensory avoiding that could be causing danger to themselves or others, right? We had a few examples that we've talked about already. Another one that we haven't touched on that is something to consider is biting. So biting is obviously something we have to react to, and we have to make sure that the child who's being bit is safe. And we do, I know you all have heard about biting as communication. Biting can be communication of a sensory need too, and that's something we really want to consider. Maslow before Bloom, good analogy. Then we want to reflect on the observations and the context of the situation, right? Some of you have shared in that opening slide. We want to observe. We want to see what's going on, right? And I think with this, we want to determine, is an alternate choice needed? Is the child showing us their need and their needs being met by what they're doing, and it's not causing harm to others, and it's something that's really just helping them? Maybe during circle time or story time at home, holding a koosh ball and doing this in their hands is helping them because that's what they need to learn. That doesn't seem like we need an alternative strategy, right? But there are situations where we do, and you all gave some really good examples of situations where we may need an alternative choice, right? So after reaction, if that's needed, and really thinking this through, giving yourself that moment to step back and think, how can I respond in this moment? Then we might want to look at giving an alternative, safer choices. When I say choices, we really want to think about those opportunities to give children those choices. So we're basically saying, like, I hear you. I am validating you that you are showing me what you need. This is not a safe choice, and I'm going to give you some other choices. So when we're giving children choices in that moment, what do you think we're doing when we give them those choices of how, the strategies that we know are going to help meet their needs, but they're getting a choice in what they're going to do? What does that do for children? I'll give you a moment to just think about that and reflect. Empower them. Yeah, empowers their agency. Going to work on my wait time for a minute. Giving them the self-esteem they need builds trust. Absolutely. They can learn to make safer, healthier choices. Validate them. Gives them control. That is a good one. I wrote down that as something I wanted to make sure we touched on. We'll talk about that in a second. Anything else that we think about with that one? These are all sense of independence. There's the other one. So yeah, when we give children choices in early childhood, we are fostering their independence. And so many times when children are telling us no, like someone said earlier, right? they want to be independent at this age, and they want to have control over some of their choices. And there are things that we cannot give a choice, right? I always tell my kids in my household, you must brush your teeth, you must take a bath, you must brush your hair. You know, these are the musts, but you have choices. You have choices of activities, you have choices of food, you have choices throughout the day, because we really want to foster that independence and empower our children. And we want children to be confident, capable human beings to make decisions, right? And I know you've talked about that if you were here last week, when you talked about executive functioning. So when we think about children who are distressed, and we think about children who may have anxiety, when we can give more choices and more control in those moments, especially when we're empowering them to make a choice and take control over something that will meet their sensory need to help regulate and calm in that moment, we are teaching them lifelong skills. We are teaching them essential lifelong skills that is going to help them learn how to cope in the future, learn how to cope next time something happens, learn what strategies work for them. And eventually they're going to be empowered to do them on their own. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to get initial reactions in the chat to this one before we talk more about it. But I really love this quote, and I feel like this quote says so much in such a little amount of words. But you have to learn to move, and you have to move to learn. What do you think about that? How powerful is that statement? We learn by doing. Absolutely. Moving is good. Movement is so good, right? They learn by exploring their environment and world around them and taking things in through their sensory system, right? They're always taking things in through their sensory system, that we need to provide the opportunity to move. Yes, the brain-body connection, so important to think about that. Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of you sharing in the chat. This is making the conversation just so much more meaningful, and I really appreciate it. So when we think about this, you know, an infant develops core strength, right? From the moment infants are born and we start doing tummy time, right? Tummy time is the big thing. They learn from natural experiences. Alice, yeah, we are going to talk about nature in just a moment. And so as that infant is developing and their motor skills are developing over time, right? They're exploring their environment. They're learning by touching, by putting things in their mouth, right? Infancy, that is like 100% on point with development to do that. That's how they're learning and growing and developing, right? And as they learn to move, they are moving to learn. And when we think about the opportunities that children need throughout the day, most of those opportunities need to include movement, right? What brain research tells us is that movement creates neural connections and promotes areas of the brain that other things don't. It promotes growth in different areas of the brain that is needed. And I think probably adults can relate to this, it reduces mental health issues. Like, I'm not sure what the person wants me to repeat. I'm going to repeat the research part because I think that's probably what you want me to repeat. You know, research tells us that movement creates neural connections and promotes growth in different areas of the brain that other things do not. It is needed for brain development. and it reduces mental health issues. And I think, speaking from myself and probably a lot of other adults, when you're experiencing stress, when you're experiencing anxiety, how good does it feel to go for a walk outside? Like, what does that do for your brain and your stress levels when you take an opportunity to go walk outside? It's huge, right? We all need it. We need to continue needing it throughout life, not just in childhood, but in childhood, it is what we know, and brain research tells us it is crucial for learning. It is crucial for brain development. How much time do you think, in the chat, share with us, how much time do you think that young children should be engaged in movement activities throughout their daily routines? How much time do you think? Now, hopefully they're sleeping 10 to 12 hours, right? So let's put that out there. Hopefully that's happening. But the remainder of their day, how much time should be spent doing movement activities? Okay, I see 30%, 5 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. Any other guesses on that one? As far as numbers go, I've seen charts out there that range, 8, 12 hours. I've seen on the CDC, we're going to go with that, what the CDC says, but the CDC recommends that children ages 3 to 5 years should be physically active throughout the entire day. They should be engaged in some kind of movement throughout their day, right? Now, there are times where we do things that involve a little more sitting, but there are ways that we can incorporate movement into those sitting times, right? When we think about reading a book. Yeah, there is a CDC recommendation for elementary school. I think on the website, and I am not going to quote this because I did not look at that part as closely, but I do know that it says about 90. I do know that it says 90 minutes of like physically active, like running, playing outside, that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Yeah, finding gross motor skills all count as movement. Absolutely, 100%. All right, can you move to the next slide, Sarah? Okay, so thinking about what we just talked about, I'm going to pose this question to you. Do we learn to sit, attend, and focus by practicing sitting, attending, and focusing? Do we learn those skills? Is our brain able to do that by practicing in early childhood, especially? Thank you, Karen, for finding that CDC research for us, recommendations. All right, so do we learn to sit, attend, and focus by practicing? What do we think? All right, I'm seeing some yeses in the comments. Seems like if engaged, it could be a bit automatic. Any other thoughts on that question? Okay, we can continue to think about that, but yes, Maria, the brain has to be mature enough to do this 100%. Okay, so When we think about the importance of movement and brain development, and we think about school readiness, for instance, I think we often think about needing to practice these skills. And I'm gonna come at it from a different angle today. And if this is not what you think, this might take some time to reflect on what I'm saying and be open to shifting mindsets a bit. And that is 100% okay. And I would hope that when you come to a webinar, that you would take away some things that you might not have thought about before. So this may be something like that. But I want us to really think about what we've talked about so far with movement and sensory needs, and how we actually learn how to do these things. Okay, so what we need is, like Maria, I believe, said, we need the maturity in our brains to be able to do this. And I would say that there's some adults who are not always able to do this without the proper supports, right? We need those neural connections that we get through movement to be able to sit, attend, and focus. And I'm not going to get into too many terms here, okay? But part of that is, our movement sensory system, and those terms that we might hear, things like vestibular and proprioceptive inputs. But what we know about brain development is, if that brain is not matured in those areas, it is very hard to sit, attend, and focus for long periods of time, and times that probably for some children are not developmentally appropriate. So when we look at, sorry, I just need to find my one place here. I'm getting into it. I lost my spot in my notes. When we look at the research, okay, research exists out there to show us that sitting in a chair or sitting down for long periods of time increases fatigue and decreases concentration. And what we also know is that the brain is much more active and is creating the neural connections needed to be able to do things like sit, attend, and focus so much more when there is so much movement involved in early childhood than when there is sitting involved in early childhood. And I think that sometimes, we have things that we think of academically as expectations for children to be ready for school. And it can be hard to wrap our minds around the fact that children are ready for school by doing things like playing outside, by rolling down hills, by hanging upside down on monkey bars, if that's appropriate for their age, climbing trees. These are all things that build really powerful connections in the brain that I think we've seen some things shift over the last 30 years. And children don't have as many of those experiences, right? And we're seeing a lot of more children who have a hard time sitting, attending, and focusing when they get to upper grade levels. So if we take a look at ourselves, we used to read To Study Walking in Nature. Yeah, like I'm going to share in a minute about like some nature schools and forest schools that I think are really, really cool. But we did a lot of things in early childhood that was play focused and only play focused, and didn't have a lot of the academics, when we think of academics as sitting and doing a worksheet, for instance. And I say that because as an observer, I still go into a lot of classrooms where that's happening. And children really, they need to do things that don't involve that kind of activity in early childhood. They need to be, you can certainly, for example, work on things like ABCs by putting your body into letters, like make letters out of your body, right? Like have the class or have a group of children make letters out of their body. There are ways to still incorporate some of those things that we think are needed for school readiness, but we can do them in ways that don't involve sitting, attending, and focusing. And we can do them in ways that are promoting the neural connections needed for the brain maturity to actually be able to do those things, sitting, attending, and focusing when you get older. So I want to take us back for 1 second before we move on and really think about what I asked you to do when we first started today. I asked you to get what you needed to be able to learn. If it was a fidget, if you needed to move. I mean, heck, we have standing desks now, right? Because we need that movement to learn and we need that movement to work. Think about those things that you might need to learn. You still need them today, right? We all have different needs and sensory needs, and we need to kind of normalize sensory, right? We all have a sensory system. We all have needs to be met. And when we think back to what is needed in early childhood and what movement does for learning, movement enables children when they get older to be able to sit, attend, and focus. The movement is what matters. And the more that it can be done in nature, the even better, which we're going to talk about in a moment. All right, so I'm going to pause for a minute and just, if anybody has any reflections on any of that, I welcome you to put that in the chat before we move on to the next slide. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but feel free to jump in anytime, and we'll also have a break for questions coming up. So Sahara, if you could move to the next slide. I did see something come in the chat. How can this also be advocated for more in elementary schools and even middle and high school? Oh, I would so agree with you on so much of that question. I would love to do that. You know, I think we are seeing some shifts in some ways, and there's small shifts, but my daughter is in middle school in Fairfax County Public Schools. And at her middle school, I was very thrilled to know that there is basically like a recess, and they get a break. They can go outside and play basketball. They can, you know, hang out with friends in the courtyard. I'm hoping that we're kind of realizing some of those things by some things I've seen. I've seen some shifts at times to recess, but you know, I think when we think back to what it used to be, I don't know for all of you, but we had, I remember having a 15-minute recess, a 30-minute recess, and a 15-minute recess, like within my school day. And I believe that my son in elementary school has one recess. And what's very interesting, and I would love to talk more with any of you interested in this work, but there's a lot of work in some European countries. Finland is a big one, and they do a lot of work there and really thinking about brain development in early childhood. And I'm pretty sure it was also in Finland. A teacher went to Finland, I believe, and taught there abroad for a year. And they told him, we do like a recess movement type activity every hour. And he was just like, this is never going to work. How am I going to keep them focused? Like, that was his mindset. And his response to after 1 year was that he has never seen children learn the way they learned in his classroom by doing that recess every hour. And this was elementary school. But just really powerful stuff when we think about it, and we really think about what actually does focusing look like? What does attention look like? What is needed to help those things? And I think there are times when we have actually taken away the things that are needed for children to come back and learn in the environment. And I think there are times where what children actually needed is taken away. And there's a whole lot of research about taking away recess, and really a lot of the times that's actually what helps them the most. And we have to kind of take a look at some of those things, I think, as we continue to explore these topics, explore mental health, explore how children really what they need to learn. Yeah, many Asian culture schools incorporate lots of gross motor activities in today. It's interesting you say that, Alice, because the other thing, another story quickly, I love stories, by the way. I think stories just make learning so much more fun. And say this all the time. Sahar hears me say this all the time. Huge Brene Brown fan. Stories really matter and empower us. But I have a friend who lived in Japan for some time, military family, and I've talked to her about the sensory system and things that we've talked about actually with one of her children who has some attention challenges. And she said that they started every day doing handstands and walking around on their hands in the morning in pre-K. And I was thinking from the sensory perspective, I'm like, this is amazing, like what this is doing for their brain, right? Another quick story about that too is that I was actually in a classroom, a community classroom, and I was there to observe, and there was a child in particular of concern who, was what I would describe as some of the things you said with movement and tactile seeking. And the day I went in there, and I was like, I thought I was here to observe him. And the teacher was like, yeah, I don't know what happened today. I mean, for half an hour, he just built this like magnificent block city and was just so focused on building this block city. And so I started asking some questions, right? I'm responding, I'm observing, I'm thinking about the context of the situation. And I asked about the morning. And in the description of the morning, she said, well, we had 30 minutes of tricycles this morning. And it was like, light went on. He got a lot of great input that morning from the tricycle work, right? I mean, that is like a ton of input that he was showing us. He was showing everybody in his environment that he needed. That's what he was doing when he was doing some of those things like running in circles around the classroom and touching his friend during circle time, or possibly, I'm sure, doing some of the similar things at home. He was showing everybody what he needed. And when he got what he needed, look at what happened, and look at how he was able to learn and be in the classroom. So it's when we really take a step back and are able to reflect on what happened and why we got the results we did, there's a lot of times where we're going to see this because that sensory need was met, right? Just quickly looking in the chat here before we go on to this. Your daughter loves to take the long route back to the classroom, the nurse office, bathroom. Yep, getting lots of movement into her day for sure. We used to have 10-minute breaks every 50 minutes. Yeah, those breaks for movement in elementary school and things like alternative seating, all of those things really help the movement system. Okay. This is all so great. I want to be mindful of my time and make sure we have some time for questions in a moment. So on this slide, what I've kind of done is just taken a couple of things, right? There is opportunities all day long for movement and touch sensory experiences that don't necessarily have to be outdoors. That might be the preference, but we also live in a different world than we lived in 30 years ago. So how can we incorporate some of these things in what our world looks like right now, right? So at the start of the pandemic, a lot of my friends know what I do. And at that time, my son was in kindergarten, and we had this kind of period of time for anybody who has that age children where it was like up until spring break, we kind of had somewhat of online learning, but everyone was trying to figure it out. And so I had friends reach out, like, what do we do? Like, how should we be continuing the academics, and what should we be doing right now? And I had a very simple response. I said, let them play. And if it can be outside, even better. Well, let me tell you, the amount of questions I got about my response was kind of funny in a way, but I was like, that is what they need right now. That is 100% what they need. And so it was a great opportunity for me to really share some of the things that I know about early brain development with my friends. But I'm going to share some of my favorite resources and books with you following today. But one of those is, and probably maybe star it, put it at the top of my list, is Balanced and Barefoot by Angela Hanscom. And she describes nature as being the perfectly balanced sensory experience. And I think that is just such a great way of saying it, right? Nature provides this optimal mind, body connection, being able to perform. It really is this place where, when it comes to our sensory systems, we can really filter it out. Okay, our brains can like filter it out. Like, think about like outside in nature versus inside at the bounce house place. I don't know about all of you, but I need a nature walk after the bounce house place. I mean, there's overhead lighting, fluorescent lighting, there's noise, there's so much stuff going on, and it's in a contained space. When we are outside in nature, that all filters out. And that is where we really can see a lot of this growth and development for children. Okay, so we've talked about this. We've talked about unstructured play last time, but we also know that what we're doing for children by creating these unrestricted outdoor play experiences, and I'm sure Sahar and Jackie touched on this, but we are giving children that ability to develop into strong, confident, capable human beings. That is what happens when we provide that unstructured play in nature and give those children that ultimate sensory experience. But in reality, like we've said, we don't necessarily live life like we've lived 30 years ago, and things have changed, and there's technology that has changed. So we're not, unless we're in a nature or forest school, which Angela talks about in her book, and like, if you're into this, go check this out. There are actually some places in Fairfax County who have some of these type learning environments that are really cool. But that's not our reality to be outside in nature all day long. I wish it was. I would love to be outside in nature all day long. But if we think about what's more realistic, we have times, and we have learning times that we should be doing things like reading books and stories and things throughout the everyday routine. But how can we provide those opportunities that really target movement and touch? Because we know these two things are foundational. How can we do that? Yes, Maria, there are some cool outdoor preschools. Yes, there are. I know one that does like create things outside with what they find, and safely they use things like hammers and build things. I mean, it's really, really cool stuff. But how do we provide some of those experiences during story times, reading books at home, throughout the day and everyday routines? What are some things that we can do for story time? Let's start with reading books and story time. What are some things we can do to make sure we're incorporating movement and touch into those experiences? Sensory books. Yeah, there's some really cool sensory books with textures in them. Oh, I love that. During the pandemic, we would listen to audiobooks while doing arts and crafts. Yeah, different kinds of books, right? Reading outside, 100%. Love that idea. Yeah, books like Head to Toe that include moving your body, incorporating movement into the story and into the books, singing songs and dancing, mindful movement books. I love that. Yeah, embedding the movement into the story, using gestures and having them imitate. Absolutely. These are all really, really great ideas. And if we shift to like everyday routines, what are some things that might be happening in your home or in your classroom that are part of those everyday routines that you could incorporate some additional movement and touch sensory experiences? Opening the windows, I like that too. Helping with chores. Yeah. You know what is like such an ideal thing? And when I worked in homes with families, we did this all the time. Helping with laundry, especially when you have a child who's seeking movement, right? Load that laundry basket up with wet clothes and push it around for a little bit. Like that is like so much input. And then helping to put the laundry into the dryer, like all that stuff is giving input, right? The one thing that I had wrote down too is helping in a garden. If you have a garden in your school or at your home, like think about that. Like if a child is not showing that they want to avoid touching the dirt, because in those cases, we want to make sure we're providing support for that, or maybe giving them a different job if that's causing distress. But if a child is really seeking that and wants to dig in the dirt and do all those things, gardening is a great way to do that. Okay, I'm going to pause and just ask for any questions or comments in the chat. You all have been so wonderful interacting during this time, but I want to make sure I just give a break for questions. And then Sahar is going to share more about how we support self-regulation.
Okay, so Amber, it looks like our first question, or would love to know more ideas for everyday routines.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually also send out some resources for things like this so that so you have access to those things. But I think what you really want to first do is just think about what your daily routine looks like. Okay. So what does your daily routine in your home or classroom look like? And then how can you have children do those things with you? So like if you have, I mean, some children probably push a regular vacuum, but like if you're vacuuming, like, is that something that your child could help you do? Some of those big muscle movements when it comes to things like doing the household chores with parents, first of all, it's really empowering and it gives them responsibility, but it also gives a lot of input to do stuff like that. When we think about, I want to quick touch on when it comes to everyday routines, sitting at like meal times, sitting in a restaurant. Something I observe so often is I think sometimes our adult expectations of what a child is capable of doing when it comes to that kind of situation is not developmentally appropriate. It's not realistic for where their brain development is at. So like, you know, when we think about sitting and what a child's able to do, if a child is like showing us that they really cannot sit that long, we need to really think about how to help them do that. So like, for instance, at a restaurant, and totally get it, I'm a parent, I had toddlers at one point, but like a toddler sitting for an hour while you're eating is really not a reasonable expectation, right? So what can you do? You know that it hasn't gone well in the past, all right? Or mealtime at home, right? Really be mindful about, number one, what can I do before, during, throughout, you know, how can I incorporate movement breaks, give some really great movement input before sitting, right? So like at the restaurant, you know, if there's an outside area, Is there a place where you can run and do some big motor movements before you sit down or before you sit down for meal times? And then thinking about the length of time you're there. Like if it's starting to get too long, like you have to go take that break and give that child some more input and movement. What are some things you can have with you? Like a child, you know, some children might sit there and look through a book, but some children might need more than those types of things. Some children might need something to fidget with while they're sitting there. And that might be enough for them. So it's really kind of, again, observing what it looks like, what children are showing us they need, and then just being really mindful of our expectations for children. Strategies for movement before meals at home would be helpful. Yes, 100%. I can give, we'll send out things like that following today, because I think all of you know, I could probably talk about this for a very long time based on how much I've already talked. Do jumping jacks in line at the grocery store. I love that. Or, you know, reach up high and reach down low, like just things that you can constantly incorporate those movement activities. Yes, I will definitely share more about this following our presentation and send out some good resources. Okay, I am going to turn this over to Sahar. And if we have some time at the end, we can also come back to these. But like I said, I will be sure to send out some resources.
There we go. Awesome. Thanks, Amber. Really, really great discussion so far. Love it. So, you know, we're going to go ahead and switch gears just a little bit. And so when thinking about setting up the environment, thinking about the play experiences that we're trying to incorporate in our everyday routines or in the classroom or at home, but really focusing in on those sensory experiences, it's also really important to remember who the major players in the room are. For a classroom teacher, that could be your students, maybe your co-teachers or your aides. You may even have like administrators who come in and out in the classroom like throughout the day. As parents and caregivers, you have your children, maybe even a grandparent or a relative, maybe even a neighbor. But most importantly, you yourselves are a huge part of that environment. And so just as much as the physical environment, whether it's indoors or outdoors, has an impact on the sensory system, you as an individual and as the adult in the room have just as much of an impact, if not more so. So we're gonna go ahead and again, switch it up just a little bit and really think about ourselves and not just our expected role or job in our children's environment, but also engaging in self-awareness of our own sensory needs and really connecting that to what that could mean for your kids. So what we're really trying to get at here is this ultimate goal of our kiddos in the classroom or our children at home, getting to that point where they're able to self-regulate. So self-regulation, and I'm going to give you the technical term first, is defined as this capability of an individual, so a child or an adult, to be an active participant when they're self-directing themselves mentally towards a goal or a completion of tasks through metacognitive, so like thinking about thinking, what goes on in the brain, motivational, and behavioral strategies. So long story short, kind of teasing that out, it's basically being able to adjust to your environment using various strategies in ways, shapes, and forms. So no matter what that really looks like, it can be anywhere from finding ways to pay attention to a specific task or adhering to those cognitive demands in your environment, but then also strategies to help manage social and emotional demands, or even working through motor tasks, you know. But when we're talking about children with sensory challenges, what we really see and observe is called dysregulation, or in other words, challenges coping and adapting when trying to understand and interpret big emotions and feelings. So, what can we as adults, as educators in the room, do to help support our kids? So we're going to break it down just a bit more. But what we do know and what research tells us is that self-regulation in early childhood really occurs through those interactions with others. And others may include all of those major players in the classroom or in your home environment that we listed. So now all of you on this call could probably attest to the statement that children are like sponges and they will attempt to mirror adults as much as possible. And so this process here is considered co-regulation. Now, co-regulation begins with the act of observing, the child watching our every move, trying to formulate an understanding of our actions. And so now when that child is observing during this time, this interaction, and that could be in any situation, that could be throughout the day during your daily routines, that could be during unstructured play, it could be during dinner time, you name it. But these interactions, this is where this idea of co-regulation occurs. And it's during this moment that we should really take a moment to understand what it is that we're trying to model. And that begins by us understanding our sensory needs to help us self-regulate. So what we see is that through this interactive and engaging process is that when a child exhibits dysregulation, by having an adult in the room who really understands their own personal sensory needs, then that adult can then mitigate or manage, I guess you can call it the vibe in the room, through co-regulating with that child. In other words, during co-regulation, the adult is able to adapt and interact with the child in a way that the child is then able to feed off of that state of regulation. So if you're feeling stressed, and it's okay to feel stress is very much real, and are showing that you're feeling stressed, or if you're showing frustration, or even, going in the opposite direction, if you're feeling an abundance of joy and excitement, then children are able to sense that, and they will respond to those feelings just the same way that we respond to them or should respond to them and react. And we can also see this happening if there's an overstimulation as well. So too much excitement that could then also impact dysregulation through a sensory overload. And so really connecting to Angie Voss's work, you as the adult, you as the educator, are that co-anchor that helps the child with their sensory challenges really go from this dysregulation to self-regulation through the act of co-regulation. So we're going to go ahead and take a moment to dive into our own sensory needs to help us understand how we self-regulate. And Amber, if you have a moment, would you mind just dropping into the chat the link? And so you can either use the link in the chat, or you can use the QR code to go to our survey via your cell phone. But this survey is actually replicated from sensorylife.com by Angie Voss. And what you see here is that you're going to be asked to check all that's applied when thinking about common strategies you use to help yourself self-regulate. So for the sake of time, we're not going to spend too much time going through and having you all check each of these strategies, but just take about a minute or so to kind of peruse through the list. And then once you have done so, go ahead and take a moment and use the chat feature and just throw in some strategies that you notice yourself engaging in throughout your day. And Amber, if you don't mind just reading those out as they pop up. And please reach out if you are having trouble accessing the link or the QR code.
It looks like it's not really a link. It doesn't go to anything. It's just an image.
Oh, no. Okay.
That could be my fault. I'm going to scroll up and try to find, I think it copied wrong. Give me 1 second. Let me see if, on something else really quick.
Well, Amber, while you're working on that, I know for myself, I am very much an individual that needs that movement input when I'm trying to focus and attention. And so, you know, if you're looking at the screen and you're watching me, like you can tell that I'm constantly fidgeting and trying to give myself that input. But I also really love having scented items around me. So I've got my chapstick next to me that, like, if I need that sensory input to kind of help ground myself and to really kind of help ground my anxiety and my stress for whatever it may be, I'll grab that chapstick and I'll just do a quick little sniff to help center myself. Or anything to do with like tactile pressure. Those pillows that some of us might have seen where if you move the sequence, it changes color. Love those. My mom has one, and every time that I go visit, we're having a conversation, I'm hugging that pillow and I'm moving it around. I'm trying to take care of my own needs while engaging with her. So these could be anything that's sporadically put throughout your home. So if you guys are not able to access the link, just, you know, maybe think about, if you're able to, put in the chat some things that you might do throughout your day to help ground yourself and bring yourself to center in those high stress or high need moments.
Sahar, there's a couple things coming through the chat. Music or sound in the background.
Yes.
And coloring pages, doodling. Naomi says she thinks best while moving and stands often at work and thinks while on walks or biking. Yeah, I'm with you, Naomi. I am 100% with you.
Those are some great strategies. Music is a really big one for me. I know I cannot work if I do not have some kind of lo-fi beats in the background. So I'm right there with you. But it looks like, you know, we all have a nice variety of different sensory needs. And at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that we are all very different and unique individuals. And so there really is no right or wrong way to help build those sensory strategies. But, you know, as you can tell, there's a lot going on when it comes to our sensory system when organizing all of these inputs. And so going from this dysregulated state to a self-regulated state, it can take a lot of work. But, you know, we have the strategies at like the touch of our fingertips. And so finding ways to incorporate that throughout our day it's going to take a little bit of effort and time, but hopefully like throughout this webinar, we've like picked up some strategies, or we've given you all some strategies to help you through that. So Amber, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to you.
Thank you, Sahar. So before we end today, we also wanted to share another resource with you. And again, we're not going to take the time to go through this whole thing, but we wanted to share this because part of how we support children's mental health is by providing what we call a goodness of fit. And what that really does, when we think about what, this is a temperament tool, let me just say that. It is an infant toddler. They have an infant version and a toddler version. However, I think if you take a look at the toddler version, you will also see how you could easily adapt this for preschoolers. And I think even just looking at some of the ideas that it gives you, you can adapt it for older children as well. But I actually found this tool when I was doing some work at Office for Children, and I found it because I was just really didn't love the terms we used for temperament. So, you know, especially the difficult temperament, that I felt like, how are we going to support children and respond to children if we're thinking of them as difficult? And so I stumbled upon this tool that is from the Center for Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation. Georgetown University actually designed this, and it has 9 temperament traits that are part of this tool. And when we think about what temperament means, just to take a step back for one moment, is that in child development, what we really are saying is this is the way children respond to the world. I think someone earlier said emotionally behaviorally, physically. This is how children respond to the world and in their innate way of being. Okay, so there is a Spanish version as well that Sahar put in the chat. And we're just going to review this. This isn't something that we're going to have the time to really dive into today, and could be a webinar in itself. But I wanted you to have this tool because I think it really helps us in responding to children and helping children's needs be met while supporting their mental health. So this is, there are 9 traits in this tool. I'm just going to quickly go over what the 9 traits are. And this really gives us a picture of how a child responds to the world. So there's activity level, there's distractibility, intensity, regularity, sensitivity, approachability, adaptability, persistence, and mood. And the nice thing is when you explore this tool, each section is going to give a little definition of what that trait means. Okay. So, and it's very, very simple to use. There is basically, you are responding for yourself and for the child. So, and it's just kind of, you know, are you more or less, pretty much. So very simple. And it does describe all this in the tool, but we're going to just zero in on something we've talked about today, and that's the sensitivity trait. So if you can go to the next slide, Sahar. So this is what happens once you do the tool. Again, it's just kind of a check more or less. But we're going to zero in here on if you have checked that you are less sensitive and you feel the child is highly sensitive, and then it's going to give you things that you can do to support the child in the way that they approach the world, in the way that they respond to the world. And you can see how this is a responsive strategy that's going to support and empower a child, right? So you can just see a couple of examples there, and probably also how you know that this can be applicable for older children as well. And I'm sure some of these things you already might do, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea of how can I do this to make sure that I'm meeting the child's needs and considering my own as well, because that is so important, as we just talked about with Sahar. So just real quick, when we think about this sensitivity trait and we think about our environments, both home and learning environments, if we have a child who is more sensitive to things like light and sound and textures, what are some things that we can do in addition to what's on the screen to provide support in those areas? What is something we can do if a child seems sensitive in the areas of light, sound, and touch, or any of the other senses as well? What environmental changes might we consider? Sure. Can I repeat the question? What kind of things can we do in the home and the classroom to make environmental changes that might help a child who's more sensitive? Turn off the lights. I will tell you that anywhere that has fluorescent lighting, if you can adjust the lighting in some way by turning that off, opening the blinds, providing natural light if it's safe through a lamp or something of that nature, that can make a huge difference, because those lights actually, for some individuals, flicker and have a slight hum to them. Noise canceling headphones. Yes. Natural light from windows. Less clutter. That's a really good example. Some individuals get very stressed by seeing clutter. Like right now on my table, I need to remove some things because I have a lot of books on my table. Daughter likes to play under a blanket. Yeah. Sound machines. Yeah, definitely. Tinted glasses. Yeah, there's so many. Yes, forts. Love that. So fun, right? Little areas that you can kind of go into that are cozy. Really, really great examples. Thank you so much again for sharing throughout the day today in the chat. Children relaxing music. Yeah. And again, all of these are observations. Like when we do some of these things, if it seems to be causing distress, then we need to reflect on that and try something else that's going to not cause distress for a child. All right, next slide. Okay, so as we reflect back on that opening question and our time together today, we talked about that children are telling us what they need, right? We really zeroed in on that. We talked about how we can support children by responding as much as we can versus reacting, and responding to those sensory needs that they're telling us and showing us, and providing those opportunities for movement and touch experiences throughout their day, in their play, in your daily interactions, particularly in nature. If we can get outside, the more we can get outside, the better. And then really thinking about how reflecting on our own self-regulation and our own temperaments helps to create that environment for children to be successful and for children to feel calm, for children to feel regulated, and to really provide less stress in those environments. So Angie Voss, which we've mentioned today, is we're huge fans. She's an occupational therapist who has wrote books, has a really great website, and she really helps parents and educators recognize and respond to what she terms sensory signals, like we've talked about today. And I wanted to end on this because I feel like this kind of ties together everything we've talked about. And I'm going to just read it out loud. But guiding and encouraging your child to seek out what their nervous system needs at any given time in a day is an essential life skill that will be utilized every day for an entire lifespan. Any reflections on that ending quote or what we've talked about today, or any questions you might have before we go? Love this. We are so in our heads all day and forget to attend to our nervous systems. Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts, reflections, questions you might have?
And we certainly would love for you to put any questions you would have for Sahar and Amber in the chat. We do have a few more minutes together and would love to help you with any wonderings that you may have.
We have to meet the needs of the whole child. Yes. We also love the work of Dan Siegel and Tina Payne. If you're familiar with those two authors, they have several books now that we always recommend. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for being here.
So we just did add to the chat our library database here at the Parent Resource Center. And then also we listed books in our library about learning through play. So, and then certainly Amber and Sahar, as maybe part of some of the resources, if you might be able to list a few books that parents may be interested in that you've mentioned today, that would be great too. And we can pass that along as well.
Absolutely. We're going to send you a list of the books that we talked about and a couple of additional ones. that parents can definitely access.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, any other last thoughts or questions for Amber and Sahar?
Jenny just put in the chat, it's a reminder that we have to view the world from our child's perspective so we can teach them, show them, and encourage them to explore while supporting their needs. It's a beautiful summary, Jenny. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we want to thank you, Amber and Sahar, so much for today and spending time with us and giving us so much valuable information for our families. And we thank everyone for joining us, and we wish everyone a wonderful Friday. And we hope that if you need anything, please reach out to the Parent Resource Center, reach out to TTAC at George Mason. They are just down the street, and they have a lot of valuable resources as well. So thanks, everyone, and thanks so much for coming, and appreciate your time.